They called her Barren. Her husband believed them. For 7 years, Michelle Adeyemi carried a shame that was never hers, until the night her husband divorced her, handed her a suitcase, and fate walked her straight into the arms of the most dangerous man in Seoul. The living room of the Kang family estate was the kind of room that had never been warm. Michelle knew this because she had spent 7 years trying to make it so. She had learned the arrangement of its furniture the way you learn the shape of a wound, with precision, with caution, with the awareness that one wrong step could reopen everything. The silk curtains were ivory. The vases were antique celadon. The floors were a pale wood that showed every footprint, and she had learned early that the Kangs took this personally. She was standing in the center of that room now. Her suitcases were behind her. 2 of them, actually, military neat, zipped and latched. The entirety of her 7 years reduced to luggage that the housekeeper had packed without being asked. That detail had not escaped her. The housekeeper who had been kind to her once, who had quietly left extra blankets outside her door in winter, had packed her bags without being asked, which meant she had known, which meant everyone had known before Michelle did. Minho stood by the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back. He was wearing the gray suit he wore for important things. Business dinners, press appearances. The day his father died, he was wearing it now. His mother sat in the high-backed chair to the left, Mrs. Kang Yoon-soo, 71 years old and untouchable, with the posture of someone who had never once doubted the rightness of her own judgment. She was not looking at Michelle. She was examining a piece of fruit from the bowl on the table beside her, turning it over in her hands as if the conversation had not yet become interesting enough to warrant her full attention. His sisters stood behind her. Both of them. The younger one, Ji-yeon, had her arms crossed. The older one, Soo-ah, was watching Michelle the way people watch something they want to remember clearly so they can describe it later, so they can tell the story at dinner parties and make it funny. Michelle placed her hands flat at her sides, that was all. The papers are signed, Minho said. The terms are what we discussed. She had not spoken in 40 minutes. She had walked into this room, looked at the suitcases, looked at the lawyer who had since been dismissed, and she had not said a single word. Minho's mother had filled the silence with commentary. The sisters had filled it with looks. Minho had filled it with logistics. Michelle looked at him now, directly, the way she had not done in years. She's not even crying, Ji-yeon said. In Korean, she said it to her sister, the way people say things in a language they assume you don't understand, even after 7 years of evidence to the contrary. She knew this was coming. She probably planned it. Michelle turned her gaze to Ji-yeon. Ji-yeon held it for exactly 3 seconds before looking at the floor. The company car will take you to, Minho began. I'll find my own way, Michelle said. Her voice came out the way she had trained it to come out in this house. Level, unhurried, entirely without apology. Mrs. Kang set down her fruit. It was the first time in 40 minutes she had looked at Michelle directly. And there was something in her face in that moment. Not respect, nothing as generous as that, but something that moved. Something that shifted slightly, like furniture in an earthquake. Too small to be meaningful, too real to be nothing. You have nothing to go back to, Mrs. Kang said. No family, no position, nothing. Michelle picked up her suitcases, both of them, one in each hand. Her shoulders did not drop. Good evening, she said, and she walked to the door. She did not look back. If you're already feeling something, stay with it, because the story that's coming is the one she didn't know she was walking toward, and you do not want to miss a single step. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's go. Before the suitcases, there were 7 years. She had come to Seoul at 26, trailing a graduate degree in a man who had looked at her across a university seminar room in New York City and said, without preamble, that she was the most intellectually formidable person he had ever argued with. This had been Minho Kang's version of a declaration. She had found it endearing. She had found him endearing, quick-minded, ambitious, capable of the kind of focused warmth that made you feel like the only person in a room full of people. She had not yet understood that focused warmth can be a performance as much as a quality, or that its presence in one setting does not guarantee its survival when the setting changes. The setting changed the moment they landed in Seoul. The Kang family was not cruel in an obvious way. That was the thing she had tried to explain over the years, on the phone with her mother, or in the brief conversations she had managed with Amara. It was not the kind of cruelty that announced itself. It was the cruelty of exclusion, of implication, of the particular Korean social register, in which the most devastating things were said in the most cordial tones. Mrs. Kang had never raised her voice at Michelle, not once. She had not needed to. The word cursed had first appeared at a family dinner 3 years in. A cousin had said it, not to Michelle directly, but in her presence, which was the preferred delivery method. Some women, the cousin had said, picking at a piece of galbi with the careful attention of someone who was not really talking about the food, are simply not suited to carry the Kang name forward. Mrs. Kang had said nothing. Minho had said nothing. Michelle had asked for the rice to be passed. She had been going to fertility doctors by then. The first one had told her, plainly and clearly, that there was nothing wrong with her. The second had confirmed this. The third, whom she had sought because surely two doctors who agreed with each other were not enough against the weight of a family's certainty, had said the same, completely healthy. No structural concerns, no hormonal irregularities, nothing that should present any barrier to conception. She had brought this information home. She had sat across from Minho at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room, the kitchen, which was supposed to mean something about the conversation being private and honest. And she had laid out the results. And Minho had nodded, slowly, and said that perhaps Western medicine had its limits, and that what they needed was time and patience, and perhaps to try a different approach, and he had been so gentle about it, so reasonable, that she had not yet asked the question that should have been the first question. She had not asked, "And you, have you been tested?" She understood later that she had not asked because she had been 30 years old, and she had still been trying to make him love her the way he had loved her in New York. And asking that question felt like an accusation, and she had not wanted to be the woman who made accusations. She had wanted to be the woman who solved problems, who adapted, who made herself small enough to fit the shape of the space she was offered and called it belonging. She had been trying to belong for 3 years by then. She had learned Korean properly, not just the functional version but the formal registers, the social codes, the difference between the Korean you used with elders and the Korean you used between friends, the particular inflection that signaled respect without submission. She had learned to cook 3 dishes that Mrs. Kang considered significant. She had attended every family event, the birthday celebrations, the ancestral rites, the business dinners where she was expected to perform the specific role of appropriate wife, which involved being present but not prominent and speaking when spoken to and smiling at the right intervals. None of it was enough. Not because it was badly done. Michelle had never done anything badly in her life, which was both her greatest strength and the thing that made the family's rejection most corrosive. She was excellent at everything she tried. She spoke their language with native precision. She knew their customs better than the cousins who had grown up in them. She was, by any measurable standard, a good wife, a gracious presence, an asset to the family she had married into. But she was not Korean, and she was not producing an heir, and in the Kang family's arithmetic, those 2 deficiencies canceled out everything else. The years had a rhythm. January to March, the New Year celebrations, during which she was seated at the far end of the family table and asked questions about whether she had consulted a traditional healer yet, as if her body were a bureaucratic problem requiring alternative administrative solutions. April to June, the spring gatherings, more photographs, more pointed absences of her name in conversations about the family's future. July to September, the relative mercy of summer when the family was less concentrated. October to December, the year-end, the tallying, the particular weight of another year that had not produced what the family considered a reason for her continued presence. Minho had been kind. In the early years, he had held her hand on the drive home from difficult evenings. He had brought her tea when she had sat too long at the window. He had said once, in year 3, "They don't understand you, I do," which she had taken as comfort and which she now understood had been, in its way, the most profound form of cowardice available to him. Because understanding her and choosing his family's silence over her truth were not 2 separate things. They were the same thing, repeated every year for 5 more years, until the hand-holding stopped and the tea stopped, and the window became a place she went alone. She had not left because she had believed in the marriage, and then she had not left because she had believed that leaving would mean admitting defeat, and she had been raised by a woman who did not admit defeat, and she had the particular stubbornness of someone who cannot distinguish between perseverance and pride. And then, somewhere in year 5 or 6, she had looked up and realized she was no longer staying because of the marriage. She was staying because Seoul had become her home, her language, her daily life, and the marriage was simply the structure that had brought her there. That was the year she stopped looking for his approval. That, in the end, was the thing that had made the divorce possible. The night was the kind of cold that Seoul does in October. Not violent, just persistent, the kind that settles into your collar and reminds you quietly that it intends to stay. Michelle stood on the pavement outside the Kang estate's rear gate, the gate she had always been let out of, never the front, because the front was for the family and their guests, and after 7 years she had never quite graduated to either. And she looked at the city. spread out before her like something that didn't owe her anything. She had 48,001 in her wallet. Her Korean bank account had been frozen as part of the settlement, pending the division of assets that she already knew would leave her with less than she was owed, because she had signed a prenuptial agreement at 26 years old when she was in love and had not yet learned the grammar of that family. Her Nigerian passport was in the inside pocket of her coat. Her phone was at 11% battery. She had a graduate degree in international business from a university in the United States. She spoke Korean well enough to overhear conversations that were meant to wound her. She had spent 7 years being the most composed person in every room she entered, and she was very, very tired. She sat down on her suitcase. Just for a moment, just long enough to breathe. The city moved around her the way it always did, bright and unhesitating, full of people going somewhere they already knew. Cabs passed. A couple walked by sharing a phone, leaning their heads together. A vendor was closing up a street stall, the smell of tteokbokki cutting through the cold in a way that was almost cruel. Because she was hungry, and she hadn't eaten since morning, and she had too much pride left to count what 48,001 could actually do. She opened her phone and looked at it. She could call the Nigerian embassy. She should probably. She had the number saved. She had saved it 2 years ago during a particularly bad week and had never deleted it, which told her something about what she had known even then. But it was 9:43 at night, and that would lead to a form and a process and a temporary housing solution that would take days to arrange, and between now and days she had nothing. She could call her friend Amara, who had moved to Busan and who she had drifted from slowly over years of being absorbed into the Kang family's gravitational pull. She scrolled to Amara's number. Her thumb hovered. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood up. She picked up her suitcases. She started walking. She did not have a destination. She had a direction, away from the estate, toward the lit parts of the city, toward anywhere that was not the room she had just left. The cobblestones of Itaewon gave way to the wider streets of Yongsan, and she walked with her suitcases because a cab felt like a concession she wasn't ready to make, a sign that she needed saving, and she had spent 7 years refusing to look like she needed saving. It was 3 blocks before the wheel on the left suitcase caught in a drainage. Grate and refused to come out. She yanked it, the grate one. She stood over it in the middle of the pavement, both hands on the handle, and she laughed. It was a short, involuntary sound. Not quite humor, not quite the other thing, the kind of laugh that comes from the place in your chest where the crying waits, when the crying hasn't quite decided to come out yet. "That looks like a losing argument," said a voice behind her. She turned. The man standing 10 feet away was not what you expected when you turned around in a dark Yongsan street after 11% battery. A disastrous evening. He was tall, significantly taller than average, with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm but from a very specific kind of discipline. His coat was black. His face was the kind of face that people describe differently depending on where they're standing. Striking from a distance, unreadable up close. He was looking at the suitcase the way people look at problems they are considering whether to involve themselves in. He was also, she realized, flanked by 2 men who were positioned in the particular way that people with protective detail are positioned, slightly behind, slightly to the sides, hands visible but aware. You didn't see that in regular Seoul streets at 10 at night. She looked at the suitcase. She looked at him. "It's fine," she said. "Your wheel is inside the grate. I can see that." He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked toward her, crouched down at the grate with the ease of someone who was not concerned about the state of his coat, gripped the suitcase handle and the grate edge simultaneously, and freed it in one clean motion. He set the suitcase upright, tested the wheel, it rolled and stood. He did not offer this as a kindness. He did not frame it as a kindness. He had simply seen a problem and resolved it the way some people resolve problems, directly without commentary. He looked at her face, not around it, at it. "You've been crying," he said. "I haven't." He did not argue with this. But he also did not accept it in the way that most people accept things they disagree with, by letting it go. He simply waited, as if the silence were a space he was comfortable occupying and she could fill it however she chose. "Are you waiting for something?" she said. Instead of "thank you. My car was supposed to be here 4 minutes ago." He glanced up the street. "It's not. That's a very ordinary problem. Most problems are in the end." She picked up both suitcases, tested the repaired wheel. It held. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than she let the words carry. He looked at the suitcases. He looked at the direction she was walking, which was, if you knew this part of the city, a direction that did not have a hotel for another 12 blocks, and the pavement narrowed unpleasantly in the middle stretch. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Somewhere," she said. He looked at her for a longer moment now. There was nothing in the look that was inappropriate. There was something in it, though, that she didn't know what to do with yet. It was the look of a person who was genuinely asking, not performing concern, not angling towards something, but actually waiting to receive an honest answer from someone who was deciding whether to give one. "I don't know," she said, which was the truth, and which surprised her as it came out. He looked up the street again. "My car is here," he said. It had appeared at the corner, silent, black, enormous. "I have a house with too many rooms. If you want to come with me, you can." She stared at him. "I know how that sounds," he said. "Do you?" "Yes," he met her eyes. "You don't know me. It's late. You're alone. This is the part where you say no." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the car. Then at the 12 blocks of dark pavement ahead of her with her 48,001 and her 11% battery and her 2 suitcases. "What's your name?" she said. "Kang Jae-hyun." She almost laughed again. "Another Kang. Of course, Michelle," she said. He nodded, as if she had confirmed something. Then he walked to the car and the door was opened for him and he turned and waited. She stood on the pavement for 4 more seconds. Then she picked up her suitcases and walked toward the car. It was the second most important decision she would ever make. She would not know what the first one was for several more months. The estate that Kang Jae-hyun brought her to was not in the part of the city where the Kang family she had just left lived. It was in the hills above it, further, quieter, with a gate that opened without ceremony and a driveway lined with trees that had been there longer than anyone in the car. The house itself was older than she expected. Traditional Korean architecture, maintained with meticulous respect, with modern additions that had been done with the kind of taste that doesn't announce itself. A woman in her 50s met them at the door. She had the efficient warmth of someone who managed a household the way a general manages a campaign. Nothing wasted. Everything in service of the outcome, but genuine all the same. Her name was Mrs. Han, and she looked at Michelle with calm, undisguised assessment, and then turned and led her upstairs without a word spoken about the circumstances. The room she was given had a window that looked out over the city. The bed was the kind of bed that made you feel, against your will, that you might actually be allowed to rest. There were dry clothes folded at the foot of it. Her size, she noticed, which she filed away in a part of her brain that was currently too occupied to process what it meant. Mrs. Han set down towels and said, "Breakfast is at 8, or later if you prefer. The kitchen is available to you from 6, and then she left, and Michelle was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not cry. She had decided she would not cry tonight, not here, not in a stranger's house. Not where she did not have the structure of a room she knew. The crying could wait for a moment when she was more certain of her footing. So she sat, and she breathed, and she looked out the window at the city that had been her home and her cage for 7 years, and she thought, "I am 33 years old. I have my passport. I have 48,001. I am in a house belonging to a man whose name I just learned." She had been in worse positions. She had not technically been in worse positions, but she had survived every room the Kang family had put her in for 7 years, and something about that, the knowledge that she had survived rooms far more hostile than this one, settled her spine a little straighter and let her breathe. She showered. She changed into the folded clothes which fit, which she was still not thinking about too carefully. She went to the window and looked out. In the garden below, a single light was on. Jae-hyun was sitting in the garden at. She checked her phone. Now connected to the house Wi-Fi and at 14% from a charger Mrs. Han had quietly left on the nightstand, nearly midnight. He was sitting alone at an outdoor table with a glass of something he was not drinking, looking at the city in the same direction she had been looking from upstairs. She watched him for a moment. He was not performing anything. There was no one around him to perform for. His suit jacket was draped over the chair beside him. His posture was not the posture of a man in control of a room. It was the posture of a man in the middle of something private, something heavy, being carried without ceremony in the only space where he apparently allowed himself to carry it. She moved away from the window. She didn't know him. She had no business looking. But she lay down on the bed and thought about the way he had crouched over the drainage grate, without hesitation, without checking his coat, without framing it as a thing he was doing. And she thought about the way he had said, "You don't know me. This is the part where you say no," as if he were laying out the logic of her own refusal for her, in case she needed it. She fell asleep with the light still on. 3 days passed before she learned who he was. She had been given the run of the house with the same quiet completeness with which everything in the house was managed. Breakfast appeared. Her clothes, returned the day after she arrived, and supplemented with items that had been purchased without discussion and left in the wardrobe, with the same neutrality as the towels, were clean. Mrs. Han was a constant presence who managed to be both available and entirely unobtrusive. 2 of Jae-hyun's staff were also in the house at most hours. They were polite. They were large. They watched without appearing to watch. "What does he do?" she asked Mrs. Han on the second morning. Mrs. Han was quiet for a moment that lasted just long enough to say everything. "He manages several business interests," she said, and then she poured the tea with the precision of someone who had answered this question in several different ways over several years and had settled on this particular phrasing as the most honest available. "Business interests," Michelle repeated. "He is a private person. I'm in his house. I'm eating his food." Mrs. Han looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Yes," she said, "you are." She placed the teacup on the table. "He does what is necessary. In a city like this, the line between legal and necessary is sometimes a matter of who's asking the question." Michelle drank her tea. That afternoon she searched his name, Kang Jae-hyun, 41 years old. Founder and head of an investment consortium that had no public information about its actual operations. Listed in 3 separate investigative journalism pieces from the last decade as a figure of interest in the restructuring of criminal enterprise in Seoul, the kind of language used when what you mean is confirmed but not proven, photographed rarely. Never at the things regular people were photographed at. Twice in connection with the kind of incident that got described in official language as an altercation involving organized interests, which was a way of saying something the article could not say outright. She looked at his photograph for a long time. It was taken from a distance, the way all his photographs were, as if photographers had collectively understood, without being told, that a closer approach would have consequences. But even at distance, the stillness was there, the quality she had noticed on the street, the sense that he existed at a different resolution from everything around him. She put down her phone. She thought about the drainage grate, the dry clothes in her size, the garden at midnight. Then she went downstairs and found a book in the library, because thinking too hard about the man who lived here would not help her build the thing she needed to build, which was a plan, an exit, a next chapter that she had written herself. She was in the library when he walked in at 4:30. He stopped in the doorway. They looked at each other. "You're still here," he said. "You said I could stay." "I did." He walked to the desk on the far side of the room and opened a drawer. "I was asking because people usually leave. Where do they go?" He paused, considered the question as if it deserved consideration. "Most of them have somewhere to go," he said. "And the ones who don't, they usually leave anyway." He found what he was looking for in the drawer, a set of keys, and straightened. "Because the house makes them uncomfortable." She looked at him. "I spent 7 years in a house designed to make me uncomfortable," she said. "This is considerably nicer." Something in his face changed. Not much, but something. "How long were you married?" he asked. She paused. "You don't ask indirect questions. I find them inefficient. 7 years. He looked at her for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. And it did not sound like the word people use when they don't know what else to say. It sounded like something chosen. "Don't be," she said. "I'm not." And she wasn't, she realized as she said it. She was many things exhausted, angry in a way that had no edges yet, uncertain of the next 14 minutes, let alone the next year. But she was not sorry. She had not yet found the bottom of what she felt, but she knew it was not sorry. He walked to the door. He stopped. "There's a room on the 3rd floor that hasn't been used in some time," he said. "If you need a workspace." She looked up. "Why are you doing this?" He did not answer immediately. It was the first time she had seen him not immediately answer something, and she noticed it. "I don't know yet," he said. And then he left. She called Amara that night. Amara answered on the second ring with the voice of someone who had been awake anyway. Michelle, just the name. But the way she said it, all the days they hadn't spoken collapsing into one syllable, all the things unsaid in those years folding gently into one sound. "I'm okay," Michelle said, which wasn't quite true but was the truest thing available. The divorce went through. Yes, silence. Amara's brand of silence was different from Mrs. Kang's. It was a silence that made room instead of filling it. "Where are you?" "I'm somewhere safe." "I'm okay, I just needed to hear your voice. I'm coming to Seoul." "Amara, don't argue with me. I'll be there by Friday." A pause. "Is there someone I should know about?" "What?" "No." "Then who's providing this somewhere safe?" Michelle was quiet. "It's complicated." "Is it the kind of complicated where I should be worried?" She thought about the investigative journalism pieces. She thought about the garden at midnight. She thought about the way he had said, "I don't know yet." "Not in the way you're thinking," she said. "Then I'll be there Friday," Amara said. "I'll bring the good tea and the better opinions." Amara arrived on Friday. She was the most herself person Michelle had ever known, loud in a way that was not noise, warm in a way that cost her something, honest in a way that had always felt like a gift rather than an aggression. She came through the door of the estate with her one enormous bag and her eyes already taking in everything, cataloging, assessing. And she looked at Michelle and said, "You look better than I expected." "I feel better than I expected," Michelle said. Amara looked around the hallway. Nice house, don't. I'm just observing. Very nice house, very quiet, very. She stopped. Jae-hyun had appeared at the top of the stairs. Amara looked at him. Then she looked at Michelle, then back at him. Oh, she said. Amara, Michelle said with warning in her voice. Oh, I am simply standing here. Amara smiled up at Jae-hyun with the brightness of someone who had no intention of simply standing there. You must be the man who let my friend move in. This is Amara, Michelle said to Jae-hyun. I can see that, he said. He came down the stairs with his usual unhurried quality and extended his hand. Kang Jae-hyun. Amara shook it. She looked at his hand, then his face, then at Michelle. Kang, she said. Isn't that a coincidence? Amara, Michelle said again. I'm just noting. Jae-hyun looked at Michelle with something that was almost humor but was primarily a question. Your friend, he said. Since university, Michelle said. She doesn't have a filter. I have a filter, Amara said. I simply choose not to use it around people who can handle the truth. She looked at Jae-hyun again. Can you handle the truth? Generally, he said. Good. Amara picked up her bag. Which room am I in? The weeks that followed organized themselves quietly around a domestic routine that felt to Michelle like learning a new language. Not the imposed one, not the Kang family language of performance and hierarchy, and the particular cruelty that comes from people who have never had to doubt their right to cruelty. This was something different, something that had no formal structure, something that simply happened. She used the third-floor workspace. She began carefully and thoroughly the process of rebuilding what she had let atrophy during 7 years of being a Kang family wife, her credentials, her network, her understanding of the current shape of the business world she had trained in. The international business she knew was 7 years old. She updated it page by page with the methodical determination of someone assembling a structure they intend to stand in. Jae-hyun was in the house most mornings and most evenings. In between, he was elsewhere, and she was careful not to ask where. Because she was a guest here, and guests did not ask the questions that belonged to the household. But they ate dinner together. She didn't know how it started. The first time Mrs. Han had set 2 places at the table without comment, and Jae-hyun had come down from the upper floor at 7:30 without apparent awareness that this was an unusual arrangement, and Michelle had come in from the workspace at the same time, and they had sat down. He had asked about what she was working on. She had told him, briefly. He had asked a follow-up question that was actually a good question, the kind that suggested he had understood what she said rather than just heard it. She had answered it. They had eaten. It happened again the next night, and the next. Within a week, it was simply the shape of evenings. He did not talk much about himself, but he listened in a way that had weight to it. The kind of listening that makes what you're saying feel like it matters. She noticed herself saying more than she intended to, noticing things she wanted to tell him, catching herself composing thoughts for the dinner table during the day. She filed this away next to the dry clothes in her size in the workspace on the 3rd floor and told herself it was simply gratitude, which was a reasonable thing to feel for a person who had given you a safe room at the end of the worst night of your life. There were things accumulating, things she kept noticing, the way Jae-hyun had, without discussion, arranged for her access to his household accounts so that she was not in the undignified position of needing to ask for things, framed not as generosity but as practicality, delivered through Mrs. Han with the same neutrality as the towels. The way he had, one morning, left a research report on her workspace desk about current international trade patterns with certain passages annotated in pen, not explanatory but interrogative, question marks, arrows to related concepts, the notes of someone who had read this himself and found it interesting, and was sharing it the way you share something you think someone will also find interesting. She had sat at the desk looking at those annotations for much longer than she needed to. The way he had learned without being told how she took her coffee. The way he had mentioned once, very casually, that there was a gallery opening the following Thursday that the owner had personally invited him to, and that he found most gallery openings tedious, but this one had some interesting West African contemporary work that he had read about. He had not invited her. He had simply mentioned it in passing, and she had said she would like to see that. And he had said 7 o'clock then, and that had been the entirety of the exchange. At the gallery, he had stood beside her in front of a large canvas. Reds and golds, Nigerian textile patterns abstracted into something that was simultaneously traditional and entirely its own language, and said nothing for a long time, just stood, present. She had found her shoulders releasing tension she hadn't known she was holding. My mother was an artist, he said, finally. She looked at him. I didn't know that. Most people don't. He looked at the canvas. She died when I was 12. She painted things I couldn't understand then. I understand them now. She waited. He didn't say anything else about his mother, but he stayed beside the canvas for another 5 minutes, which said everything. She was in the workspace at 11 at night, not working exactly, but present in the way that a room can hold you when sleep won't, when she heard it from below. A sound, and then silence, and then the sound again. She knew this house now, in the way that a person comes to know the architecture of a place they live in, where it breathes, where it settles, which floorboards announce themselves, which doors require a particular pressure to close properly. The sound was from the study on the ground floor, and it was not a sound she had heard from this house before, and her feet took her to the hallway before her thinking caught up. The study door was open by 4 inches, just enough light to see by. He was at his desk, but not working. He had pushed everything to one side, the documents, the phone, the careful geography of a man who runs things, and he was sitting with his elbows on the cleared space and his face in his hands, not asleep. She could see from the set of his shoulders that he was not asleep. He was simply stopped. All the machinery of him that was always running, the precision, the control, the economy of movement and word that she had observed over weeks, all of it suspended. He was, in this room with no audience, completely without it. On the desk beside him, she could see from the angle of the light was a photograph. She could not make it out clearly, but the fact of it being out, placed, not filed, out in the open on the cleared surface, told her something about why he was sitting this way at 11 at night. She stood in the hallway for 10 seconds. She considered going back upstairs. He had not heard her. The door was only 4 inches open. She could retreat without this becoming anything. Instead, she put her hand on the doorframe, just there. Not a knock, not an entrance, a presence. He looked up. They looked at each other. He did not perform recovery. He did not straighten himself into the version of himself that met the world. He simply looked at her from where he was, face still open in the way she had never seen it, and waited. "I couldn't sleep," she said. He looked at the photograph on the desk. He didn't move it. "My mother," he said. "Her birthday was yesterday." She stepped into the room. She sat down in the chair across from the desk, the one she usually sat in for their evenings when conversation had moved from the dining room to here, which happened more and more. She did not look at the photograph. She looked at him. "Tell me about her," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "She was the only person I have ever known," he said slowly, "who made me feel that the world had a correct temperature. Do you understand what I mean by that?" She did. She understood it completely. It was the specific thing she had been missing for 7 years in a house that was always the wrong temperature. "Yes," she said, "I do." He looked at her for a moment in the way that told her he knew she meant it. She would have found all of this. He gestured briefly and generally, at the house, at himself, at the empire around him. Very excessive, he said. And there was something in it that was both grief and pride and the smallest amount of humor. The first humor she had heard from him that was not directed outward. "She sounds like she was right," Michelle said. He almost smiled. "Not quite, but almost." She stayed in that room for another hour. They did not always talk. Sometimes they simply occupied the same space, the photograph on the desk between them like a third person who had been there first. When she finally said goodnight and went upstairs, she understood something she had not had language for before, that this man had built everything around him out of the absence of the person who knew how to make the world warm, and that he had been carrying that architecture alone for 29 years. She thought about that for a long time before she slept. There was a night in November when something almost happened. They had come back from a dinner, a professional thing of his, that she had accompanied him to because Mrs. Hahn had appeared with a dress and a note from him that said simply, "If you'd like 7 o'clock." She had liked. She had worn the dress, which was the green of deep water, and she had been, by any objective measure, the most composed person in the room, and she had watched him across the table navigate the politics of the room with the same disciplined economy he brought to everything, and she had thought, with something that was no longer something she could call merely gratitude, "I genuinely like who this man is." They had come home. Mrs. Hahn had gone to bed. Amara was in Busan for the week. They were in the hallway. He was about to go to the study. She was about to go upstairs. He turned to say goodnight, and she was already half-turned toward the stairs, and the angle between them was wrong, too close, too warm from the night out. The city sounds still in their clothes, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was too long. To be nothing, his hand came up, not toward her, but to the door frame, and rested there, a gesture that was either closing a door or holding a world open. "Michelle," he said. "Just her name?" "I know," she said, and she went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed and held very still and told herself, carefully and specifically, that she was 7 weeks out of a marriage that had lasted 7 years, that she was living on the grace of a man she had met in a street, that the ground beneath her was still being remade, and that feelings that arrive when you are in the middle of being rebuilt should be treated with caution. She told herself this for 20 minutes. Then she got up and went to the window and looked at the garden. And the single light was on in the study below, and she looked at it for a long time. And she thought about the woman who had walked out of the Kang estate with 2 suitcases and laughed at a stuck wheel. And she thought about what that woman deserved. She thought she deserves to choose this time. She thought not yet. She thought but not never. The night everything cracked open started with a phone call Michelle didn't take. It was Minho's number. She looked at it on the screen. The number she had saved for 9 years and had not yet deleted because deletion felt like a ceremony she wasn't ready to perform, and she held the phone until it stopped ringing. Then it rang again. Then his mother's number appeared. Then 40 minutes later, Amara knocked on the workspace door. "There's something online," she said, in the voice she used when she was trying to calibrate how to deliver something. Michelle looked up from her laptop. "About Minho," Amara said. "And his." She stopped, the woman he announced. The news had come out 4 days after the divorce. Minho Kang of Kang Holdings, recently divorced, had confirmed his engagement to a woman named Choi Da-yoon, 28 years old, and had confirmed in the same statement that they were expecting their first child. The family had released a photograph. Mrs. Kang had been photographed at an event, smiling in a way Michelle had never once seen directed at her. This news had reached Michelle via Amara, who had driven from Busan specifically to be with her when it did. It had felt, in the hours after she heard it, like being told that gravity had changed direction, not because she wanted Minho back, because she did not, because she had not wanted Minho back in what felt like years, but because of what it confirmed, that there had been no problem with the new woman, that the baby existing confirmed that Minho was capable of fathering children, which meant she had not been able to finish the thought. "What's online?" she said now. Amara turned the phone around, the headline. Choi Da-yoon's pregnancy revealed to be fabricated. Kang family statement pending. The story had broken an hour ago. A medical professional cited anonymously. A document, a timeline that didn't hold. Choi Da-yoon had not been pregnant. Choi Da-yoon had not been pregnant at the time of the announcement, had not been pregnant in the weeks before it, and the evidence that had been quietly provided to 2 separate journalists suggested she had never been pregnant. She had fabricated it. To secure the engagement, to secure the family. Michelle read the article 3 times. Amara was very quiet beside her. "Michelle, I'm fine." "You don't have to be. I know." She set down Amara's phone. "I'm not surprised," she said, and even as she said it, she understood it was true. "I'm not surprised that they believed what they wanted to believe. About her, about me, she paused. "I want to know. Know what?" Why they were so certain it was me. She looked at Amara. For 7 years. Every doctor, every family dinner, every conversation where my mother-in-law looked at me like I was something defective. They were so certain, and Minho never. She stopped. Something cold and specific was moving through the back of her mind. She toward her carefully, the way you pull a thread you're not sure of. Minho had never gone to a doctor. She had gone to 3 of them, over 3 years, and been told each time that there was nothing wrong with her. And then Minho had said that Western medicine wasn't suited to understand their particular situation and they should try a different approach. And she had accepted this because she had been 30 and in love and trying to keep her marriage together. He had never gone. She had been tested 3 times. He had never gone. "Something is wrong," she said. "Michelle, something is specifically wrong and I need to go to a hospital. You can do that tomorrow. I want to do it now." She walked downstairs. Jae-hoon was in the study. She knocked, which she had not done before, and he said, "Come in," which he said in the voice that was his regular voice, level, attentive, and she opened the door. "I need to go to a hospital," she said. "Are you hurt?" "I need tests. I need comprehensive fertility testing and I need it tonight." He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he stood up and reached for his coat. The hospital that Jae-hoon took her to was private, modern, and run by staff who understood that his requests were to be fulfilled quietly and completely. She was seen within 20 minutes. Blood work, ultrasound, a reproductive endocrinologist who came in at 11 at night without apparent irritation and who examined her with professional thoroughness and then sat down and looked at her chart. "These are your results from 2019, she said. She had requested the records, which had arrived electronically because the hospital had that kind of reach. "And 2021? "Yes, both clean." She looked at the new results. "These are also clean." She put down the tablet. "Miss Adeyemi, your reproductive health is completely normal. There is nothing that would prevent you from conceiving naturally." The room was very still. Michelle heard the doctor's words land in the sequence she said them. Completely normal. Nothing. Prevent. Naturally. She looked at the wall across from her. 3 tests, she said, over 7 years. And all 3 times, the results were normal. Michelle's voice was very even. Yes, they were, I know. She sat for a moment. The problem was never mine, she said. The doctor was quiet. If a woman is tested and is healthy and a couple still cannot conceive, and the man has never been tested, then the next step would be testing the man, the doctor said carefully. And if the man were tested and had a condition that prevented fathering children, and had known this, and chosen not to disclose it to his wife or his family, that would be, the doctor said, a significant ethical and legal matter. Yes, Michelle said, it would. She got dressed. She walked to the waiting room. Jae-hyun was standing by the window, not sitting, standing with his hands in his coat pockets, looking out at the city the way he did when he was thinking about something he hadn't resolved yet. He turned when she came in. He looked at her face. He didn't ask what the results were. He waited. There was never anything wrong with me, she said. His jaw moved slightly, not much, but something in him shifted the way something had shifted in Mrs. Kang's face on the night of the divorce. Except in him it was different. In him it was something that looked, briefly, like anger on her behalf, clean, controlled anger. The kind that comes from a sense of justice rather than ownership. He did not say anything for a moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. Not for you, he said. For the years, she looked at him. 7, he said. You told me at dinner the first night. She had. She had not remembered he had remembered. She looked at the floor for a moment, and she was very careful about her breathing, because the crying had been waiting for a long time now, and this room, at midnight, with this man standing 4 feet away, was not where she had planned to let it happen. But the thing about the crying, when you've kept it waiting too long, is that it stops asking for a good time. She pressed her hand over her mouth. He was beside her before she had time to register the movement. Not touching her, she noticed this, that he stood close without assuming contact, just there, present, a wall against the world that had nothing to do with what he wanted and everything to do with what she needed. She cried for 8 minutes. He stood there for all of it. When it was done, she straightened. She found a tissue in her coat pocket. She was precise about restoring herself. Thank you, she said. Don't, he said with the same inflection she had used. A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh. The scandal that followed the exposure of Choi Da-yoon's fabricated pregnancy detonated across Korean business and social media with the particular thoroughness that Seoul reserved for the public downfall of wealthy families. The Kang Holdings share price dropped 11% in 3 days. Min-ho was removed from his position as executive director by the board. Choi Da-yoon issued a statement, then retracted it, then disappeared from public life entirely. Mrs. Kang released a statement. It was the first time Michelle had ever seen the woman's name in print next to the word apology, and she read it 3 times before she was willing to accept that the text said what it said. Then came the thing that mattered more. A medical document, leaked from a source that was never identified but whose access to Min-ho's personal records suggested a specific kind of institutional familiarity, appeared in the hands of 2 journalists simultaneously. Kang Min-ho had undergone comprehensive fertility testing in 2018. He had been diagnosed with a severe condition that rendered natural conception virtually impossible. He had not told his wife. He had not told his family. He had told no one. For 5 years after the diagnosis, while his family called his wife Barren at dinner tables, and his mother-in-law used the word cursed to her faces, and the woman he had promised to love bore the weight of a shame that belonged entirely to him, he had said nothing. The story was everywhere by morning. Amara found Michelle in the workspace and stood in the doorway and didn't say anything for a long time. He knew, Michelle said. The whole time. He knew. I know, 7 years, every dinner, every look, She stopped. Her hands were flat on the desk. He watched them and he said nothing. I know. He let me go to 3 separate doctors and sit in those rooms and be told I was fine and go home. And tell him and watch his face, and he already knew, Michelle. She stopped, she breathed. I know, Amara said again softly. Michelle looked at the window, the city, the way it moved without stopping. I'm not going to fall apart, she said. I know that too. I'm going to be angry for a while, and then I'm going to build something that proves it didn't break me. Amara came to the desk and sat across from her. Tell me what you need. Michelle thought about it properly for the first time. I need a lawyer. A good one. The settlement was structured on a misrepresentation, the grounds of the divorce, the documentation. I want it reviewed. Done. I need my business contacts from before the marriage reactivated, the ones that matter. I have most of them. I kept them. Michelle looked at her. You kept my contacts? I kept everything, Amara said steadily. I was waiting for this day. I have been waiting for it for 4 years. Michelle felt something close in her throat. You never said. You weren't ready to hear it. Amara reached across and put her hand on Michelle's briefly. You're ready now. There was a morning in December when she was alone. Jae-yoon was in Busan for 3 days on business she hadn't asked about. Amara was in Busan coincidentally, which Michelle suspected was not entirely coincidental, but Amara had the grace to at least make it look unrelated. Mrs. Han was there during the day but went home at 6. The house was hers in a way that was unfamiliar, not hostile, not empty in the way empty houses sometimes are, but hers in a way that asked her a question she had been avoiding. She sat at the workspace desk and looked at the city and tried to think clearly. She had been here for 2 months and some days. The legal process was moving. The professional reconstruction was moving. She had 3 conversations scheduled with potential business partners for the following week, and at least one of them felt like it would lead somewhere real. She had a life taking shape, and here, in this house, in this garden, at this table every evening, here was something else taking shape, and she was not looking at it directly yet, and it was time to decide whether to look. She pressed her palms flat on the desk and made herself look at it directly, at what she was building inside this house, at the feelings she had been filing under gratitude for 2 months because gratitude was manageable, and the other thing was not. She was falling in love with him. She had probably been falling since the hallway, maybe since the gallery, maybe since the drainage grate, if she was going to be completely honest with herself, which was something she did not always choose to be. And she could leave. That was the thought that arrived next, cold and clear. She could leave. The legal process was in Jiwon's capable hands. Amara had the contacts. She had enough now to find a furnished room somewhere, to continue building her professional second chapter from ground she had rented herself. She did not need this house. She could leave. She could remove herself from a situation that was complicated and uncertain, and carried the weight of who this man was and what his world contained, and she could build her new life clean on her own terms, in a room that owed nothing to anyone. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about the annotations in the margins of the research report, the question marks, the arrows, the act of a person who reads something and thinks, she would find this interesting. She thought about 8 minutes in a hospital hallway. She thought about just her name, said in a doorway, which had contained more than most people managed in full sentences. She thought about a mother who painted things he couldn't understand, and a garden at midnight, and the way grief and pride and loss had been living in a man for 29 years and had never had a room warm enough to put them down in. She picked up her phone. She called her mother. Her mother answered on the first ring. "Baby," her mother said. Michelle closed her eyes. "Mama," she said. "I've been watching the news," her mother said. "About the family, I know. Are you all right?" "I'm more all right than I've been in a long time, actually." Which is a strange thing to say. "Tell me where you are," Michelle told her. She told her about the night with the suitcases in the street and the drainage grate. She told her about the house and Mrs. Han and Amara. She told her carefully about Jae-hyun. Her mother listened to all of it. "And this man," she said, "who lives in this house, who looked after you. Yes, you're in love with him. Mama, Michelle, I have known you for 33 years, a long pause. I don't know what to do with it." Michelle said, "What does he feel? He doesn't perform things. Whatever he feels, it's real. I know that. Then what are you afraid of? That I'm rebuilding my life on borrowed ground, that the ground belongs to him, that if he changes his mind, I lose the ground and the house and the— Michelle, when did you ever need someone else's ground?" She sat with this. "You walked out of that family with 2 suitcases. You walked out and you kept going. You are your own ground. You always have been. The question is not whether you can stand without him. You can. The question is whether you want to stand with him." Michelle looked out the window. She thought about the canvas at the gallery and the silence beside it, the question marks in the margins of the research report, the way he stood in that hospital waiting room for 8 minutes and didn't touch her and didn't leave. "Yes," she said, "I think I do." "Then stop managing your feelings," her mother said, "and talk to the man." She stayed in the workspace for another hour after the call. But when she got up, the decision was made, and she felt the particular lightness that comes when you stop carrying the weight of something you've been refusing to put down. If you're watching this and you can feel it, that pull between what Michelle knows and what she's beginning to feel, then you know exactly what's coming and you know it's going to cost her. Don't go anywhere. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that's going to keep you up past 2 in the morning. Keep watching. She fell ill the following week. It was ordinary at first, a chest cold, the kind that comes in December in Seoul when you've been too focused on your work to notice the temperature dropping. But the cold became a fever, and the fever became the kind of fever that makes the room tilt when you stand up and misses. Han found her at the workspace desk at 2 in the afternoon, and the rest of the afternoon moved quickly. Car, hospital, the familiar staff, treatment. The doctor ran routine panels, standard procedure for anyone admitted with a fever, and then she came back in with a different quality of attention. Monsieur Adeyemi, the fever is resolving well. We should have it fully managed by tomorrow. She paused. There's something else. Michelle looked at her. Routine blood work, one of the panels. The doctor placed her tablet on the tray table. You're pregnant. The room was very still. Michelle looked at the tablet, the numbers, the confirmation line. That's not. 6 weeks, the doctor said gently. Approximately. It's very early, but it's confirmed. Michelle looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she pressed her hand over her mouth. And this time it wasn't grief. It was something she had no practice containing because she had spent 7 years being told she would never feel it. And the feeling had no shape she recognized, and it was vast and warm and terrifying and entirely real. 6 weeks, she said. Yes. She pressed her hand harder over her mouth. Outside in the waiting room, Kang Jae-hyun was waiting again. She asked the doctor to give her 10 minutes alone. She used them badly. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the wall and tried to find the logical sequence of this, and the logical sequence kept breaking apart because the emotion was too large for logic right now. She was pregnant. She was 6 weeks pregnant in December in Seoul in a hospital bed with a fever that was resolving, and the man waiting in the next room was not the father, but was the reason she was still in this country and in this hospital, and was possibly the reason she was still in any meaningful sense standing. She had not yet told him about the hallway, about her mother's call, about the decision. She had been waiting for the right moment, she thought. This is not the right moment, she thought. It might be the only moment. She got up. She found her coat. She walked to the door. He was standing by the window again. He turned when she came out. She looked at him. He looked at her face. He waited. I'm pregnant, she said. Something happened in his face that she had never seen before. It moved through him the way seismic things move through the body, not on the surface, but in the structure. He went very still. And then he was moving toward her, and he stopped a foot away with the precision of someone who was controlling himself very carefully. Tell me what you need, he said. She looked at him for a long time. I need you to stop asking me what I need, she said, and tell me what you want. He held her gaze. I want. He stopped, started again. I've wanted something since a drainage grate in Yongsan 2 months ago, he said. And I have been trying to give you space to arrive at your own feet before I told you. I'm at my own feet, she said. I can see that. Then tell me. He reached out. He touched her face, the side of her jaw light, specific, the first time he had touched her. And it was the most precise and careful touch, as if he were learning the shape of something he had been thinking about for a long time. I want this, he said. Everything that comes with it, if you'll let me. She covered his hand with hers and held it there. Okay, she said. The news moved the way news does in Seoul, in circles, then in waves, then everywhere at once. Michelle had not announced anything. But the legal case had continued its quiet progress, and Jiwon had ensured the right information reached the right places. And between the medical records and the investigative journalism and the revised settlement proceedings, the story of what Min-ho had done and what his family had allowed was now the public record. The woman who had been called Barren for 7 years, while her husband held the proof of his own condition in a private medical file. The family who had weaponized someone else's integrity to protect their own. When Michelle's pregnancy was confirmed and became known, through Amara, who could not physically keep herself from telling people, and whom Michelle had forgiven within 30 seconds because, of course, the response from the people who had said the things they had said was a silence so thorough it had its own sound. Mrs. Kang did not call. Jiyeon called and left a voicemail that Michelle listened to once and then deleted. Sua sent a message through a mutual acquaintance that contained the word sorry 3 times, and an implication that circumstances had been misunderstood, which was the closest the Kang family had ever come to accountability, and which landed in Michelle's chest, as exactly as hollow as she expected. She had nothing to say to any of them, not yet. Not because she was storing up anger to deploy. The anger had done its work, and she had let most of it go. She had nothing to say because there was nothing left they could give her that she needed. Then Min-ho came. He called first. She did not answer. He called again. She answered the 3rd time. I need to see you, he said. His voice was different. Not performatively different. Not the calculated softness of someone managing a public relations crisis, which she had been prepared for. Actually different, as if something had been removed from it. The armor she had watched him build over 9 years, piece by piece, as his family's approval became the only thing he was organizing his life around. Why? She said. Because what I did was, there are things I need to say to your face. You don't have to accept them, but I need to say them. She thought about it for 24 hours, she told Jae-hyun. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, That's your call to make. She looked at him and thought, 7 weeks ago, that sentence would have made me want to ask if he would come with me. And now it fills me with something that might be the truest version of love I've ever understood, which is that he gives me the ground and lets me stand on it myself. I'll go, she said. Minho was thinner. Not dramatically, not in the way that made a statement, but in the way that the past several months had been paying a bill he owed. They met at a cafe, neutral, public enough to be safe and quiet enough to be real. He sat across from her, and he did not manage his face, and she had the strange and disorienting experience of seeing him as a person rather than as the architecture of the last 7 years of her life. I've known since 2018, he said. The test. I've known since 2018. I know, she said. I was ashamed. My father was still alive, and the family pressure for an heir was. He stopped. Those are reasons. They're not justifications. I know that. They're not justifications, she agreed simply. I watched them, what they said to you. I watched my mother. I watched my sisters. And I knew, and I said nothing, and that is something I will carry for the rest of my life. She looked at him. She waited to find the anger that had been with her for months and found in its place something that was not forgiveness exactly, not the kind that absolved, the kind that could be used as currency, but something quieter, the recognition of a man who had broken something irreparable because he was afraid of his own family's judgment. Minho, she said. He looked at her. I know why you did it, not why it was right, but why you did it. I have spent 7 years in a room with your family. I understand the weight of that room. He was very still. I'm not going to forgive you today, maybe not for a long time, but I'm not going to hate you, because hating you would be giving you space in here. She placed a hand on her chest briefly. That belongs to something else now, I heard. About the yes, she said. I'm glad, he said, and she heard that he meant it. The specific, unmanaged grief of it, he was glad, and it also broke something in him to be glad. I know, she said. She stood up. She put on her coat. Minho, she said. He looked up. If you hadn't divorced me, she said, I would never have found the family I deserved. She said it without cruelty and without performance and without the weight of the 7 years behind it. She said it as a simple fact, the way you name a city or a direction, and then she walked out. The legal case concluded 3 weeks later. Jiwon had done what excellent lawyers do when the facts finally align with justice. She had moved efficiently and without sentiment. The revised settlement was substantially different from the original. The misrepresentation in the grounds of the divorce, the implied attribution, of the fertility issue to Michelle, documented in the original filing's language and now directly contradicted by Minho's own medical records, had given Jiwon the leverage to rebuild the terms from the foundation. Michelle was not wealthy when it was done, but she was not homeless. She was not starting from nothing. She had a figure that was fair, and the satisfaction, which was not small, of having been seen clearly by at least one room in this process. She read the final document at the workspace desk, and when she was done, she closed the laptop and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Mrs. Han knocked on the door. She was carrying tea and something small on a plate that Michelle had mentioned once months ago that she liked, a specific pastry from a specific shop that Mrs. Han would have had no reason to remember and had clearly remembered. She set it down without comment. Thank you, Michelle said, for everything since the beginning, Mrs. Han looked at her with the same undisguised assessment she had offered on the first night. Then she said, You were worth the trouble from the first moment. I knew it before he did. She left before Michelle could respond, which was, she suspected, the intended sequence. The wedding was in April. It was not a large ceremony. This was Jae-hyun's position, which aligned entirely with Michelle's, both of them having had their fill of events designed to perform for audiences rather than to mean something. It was held at the estate, in the garden where she had first seen him sitting alone with a glass he wasn't drinking, and the garden was full of people she had chosen. Amara, who cried from the moment she arrived and was unrepentant about it. Her mother and her 2 aunts, who had flown from Lagos and who descended on the estate with the warm and immediate authority of women who intended to assess everything and make sure it was good enough for their girl. Jae-hyun's 2 closest colleagues who were exactly as they should be expected to be, watchful, warm, and absolutely certain that their respect for him extended to anyone he had chosen, Mrs. Han, who wore a different dress than usual and cried and denied it, Park Ji-won, the lawyer, who came as a guest and not a professional, and who had the quiet satisfaction of someone who had helped build something properly. There was no Kang family of the previous kind. There was no Mrs. Kang Yoon-soo in a high-back chair. There was no one turning fruit over in her hands with the thoughtful cruelty of a woman who had never doubted her own judgment. Michelle stood in the garden in a dress the color of the late afternoon sky, and she thought about the woman who had stood in that other living room several months ago with 2 suitcases and not crying, and she thought that woman did not know yet what she was walking toward. But she walked anyway. That woman was so tired and so alone and so certain that what she carried was true even when every room in the world was telling her otherwise. She deserved to see this garden. Jae-hyun was standing at the end of the aisle, which was not really an aisle. It was just the path between the garden chairs, lined with the white flowers his housekeeper had chosen, without being asked because she knew things. Like this she always knew, and he was looking at her, not the crowd, not the efficient her. With the same quality of attention he brought to every room he entered, but different here. Open in a way she had come to recognize as the only version of him that mattered. He had told her one night what the wait was. He had told her about his father, not the Kang family she had married into, a different family, a different Kang, the kind of family that requires its sons to be made of a specific kind of stone and replaces them with something harder when they succeed in berries. Then when they don't. He had told her about being 12 and watching his mother die and understanding, in that year, that love was the most dangerous thing a man in his position could afford. He had built an empire around that understanding. And then he had met a woman with 2 suitcases in a Yongsan street who didn't say thank you until it was real, and who cried for 8 minutes in a hospital hallway without apology, and who looked at him in a gallery in front of a canvas and understood the silence without it being explained. "You're the first person," he had said, who understood the silence. She walked down the garden path. Her mother was weeping openly. One of her aunts had the look of a woman composing a speech she intended to deliver at the reception. Amara had both hands over her face. Michelle reached Jae-hyun and he took her hands. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said. Which was their language for I know, which was their language for everything that mattered. He smiled. She had learned his smiles over the months, the professional one, the rare public one, the one he used when she said something that surprised him, and this one which was the smallest and the realest, the one that didn't perform anything for anyone. They were married. A year later, their twins came, a girl and a boy, born in the good season when the city was warm and the garden was full of color, and Mrs. Han brought tea without being asked while Jae-hyun held one and Michelle held the other, and neither of them said anything for a long time, because some things you just have to be inside. The girl had Michelle's jaw and Jae-hyun's silence. The boy had Jae-hyun's hands and Michelle's absolute certainty about the world. Amara visited within the week and held both children simultaneously and cried and announced that she was moving to Seoul, which was not a surprise. Michelle's mother came for a month. She sat in the garden and spoke to Mrs. Han in the language of women who manage households and love the people inside them, and they understood each other completely despite sharing almost no common language, which told Michelle everything she needed to know about what kind of people they both were. There was one afternoon. The twins were about 4 months old. The garden was in the last days of the warm season, and the light was doing the thing that late afternoon light does in Seoul when the city goes soft at the edges. When she sat at the garden table, watching them in the little bouncing chairs Mrs. Han had found, and the children were making the sounds that very new people make when they are, regarding the world and finding it interesting, and she looked at them. She thought about a room with ivory curtains and pale floors that showed every footprint. She thought about 7 years of dinners and looks and the specific language of women who use cruelty as an instrument of belonging. She thought about a medical examination room where a doctor said completely normal 3 times while she sat and understood for the first time what it meant to be robbed of a narrative. She thought about a drainage grate in a Yongsan street. She thought about 8 minutes in a hospital hallway. She thought about the gallery and the canvas and the silence beside it that she had understood. She thought about everything she had lost, and she thought about how every single thing she had lost, the marriage, the house, the status, the life she had spent 7 years constructing in a building that was never going to hold, had been guiding her, with the particular indifference of grace toward this garden, these children, this man who was inside the house right now, and who would come out in 15 minutes, because he always came out in the late afternoon now, because this was when she was here and he had rearranged the architecture of his days around that fact. She looked at her children. The boy looked back at her with the steady, unblinking regard of a person who has no reason yet to doubt the world, and she thought, "You will never sit in a room where someone looks at you the way that family looked at me. You will never carry a shame that isn't yours. You will never doubt your belonging. I am your belonging." The garden gate opened. Jae-hyun came in, his coat off, his sleeves turned up, carrying 2 cups of something Mrs. Han always knew, and he stopped when he saw her face. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. He looked at her for a moment, the specific look that he had developed in the past year and a half, that she suspected she had also developed for him, the one that did not need the sentence to be finished. "Everything," he said, correcting her, and she saw that he understood. "Yes," she said. Everything. He sat down beside her and put one cup in front of her and kept the other, and they both looked at the children in the afternoon light. And the city was out there beyond the garden walls doing what cities do, moving without stopping, full of people going somewhere they already knew. Here in this garden, everything had already arrived. The woman they had called Barren watched her children in the fading afternoon light, understood, with the clarity that only comes from having been on the other side of loss, that some doors are closed by the wrong hands for the right reasons. That the rooms you are forced to leave are sometimes the rooms that were never yours, that the family you are denied is sometimes simply the family that hasn't found you yet. She had been found. She had also done the finding. Both things were true. Both things were hers. She picked up her cup. She drank her tea. She did not look back. That's the story. Every word of it earned. If this one stayed with you, if you felt something for Michelle, if you saw yourself in her refusal to collapse, then you know what to do. Like this video. Leave a comment and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And share it with someone who needs to hear that what they lost might just be leading them somewhere better. She didn't break. She became. And so can you.